The old house at Ravens Hollow had stood for over a century, weathered and gnarled like a tree bent by relentless storms. It loomed at the end of a gravel driveway, its Gothic spires piercing the gray sky. The locals whispered about it. Stories of missing people, inexplicable deaths, and strange lights flickering in the windows long after the sun had set. No one stayed in the house for long. Not even the bravest dared to linger past twilight. But Julie Mercer wasn't one to be scared off by stories. As a freelance journalist with a growing reputation for uncovering local legends, Julie had spent years chasing down the darker corners of human history. When she first heard about the Blood Diary, an artifact said to have been written in the ink of its owner's veins, she knew Ravens Hollow would be her next assignment. "It's just an old house," Julie said to herself, gripping the steering wheel as her car bumped along the uneven driveway. The radio crackled with static, then went silent. The trees lining the drive seemed to close in, their skeletal branches clawing at the gray sky. She glanced at the passenger seat, where her camera and notebook sat, ready to capture whatever she might find. When the house finally came into view, Julie's breath caught. It was larger than she had imagined, its blackened facade dotted with shattered windows. The front door was a massive, ornate thing of carved oak, scarred and weathered. It seemed to groan as she pushed it open, the sound echoing through the cavernous interior. The air inside was damp and heavy, carrying a faint metallic tang. Dust motes floated in the weak light streaming through the broken windows. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, and the hardwood floor creaked beneath her boots. The house seemed to breathe, its silence broken only by the faint sound of dripping water. Julie's footsteps led her to a grand staircase, its banister warped and splintered. She hesitated, then began to climb, each step a reluctant groan under her weight. On the landing above, she found a hallway lined with doors, most ajar. At the end of the hall was a study, its door closed. "This is where it begins," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. The study was dim, lit only by the weak daylight filtering through torn curtains. A massive oak desk dominated the room, its surface cluttered with yellowed papers and a brass candlestick. But it was the diary that drew her attention. It sat in the center of the desk, bound in cracked leather the color of dried blood. Julie's hand trembled as she reached for it. The moment her fingers brushed the cover, a chill shot up her arm, and the room seemed to darken. She hesitated, then opened the diary. The first page was blank, save for a single line scrawled in jagged handwriting. "To write here is to give yourself to the house." Julie frowned, her journalist instincts kicking in. She flipped the page and found more writing, paragraphs that seemed to crawl across the paper in a language she didn't recognize. And then, on the final page, a fresh line of text appeared before her eyes, as if written by an invisible hand. "You are not alone." The words bled into the paper like fresh ink, and Julie dropped the diary, stumbling back. A cold wind rushed through the room, slamming the door shut and extinguishing the feeble daylight. For a moment, the room was plunged into darkness, and Julie swore she heard the faint sound of whispering, a cacophony of voices overlapping in a language she couldn't understand. She grabbed her camera and snapped a photo, the flash illuminating the study for a brief second. When the light faded, she saw it, a shadow in the corner, tall and impossibly thin, with glowing red eyes that fixed on her. Julie's heart raced as she fumbled for the door handle, yanking it open and running down the hallway. Behind her, the whispering grew louder, more insistent. When she finally burst out of the house, the whispers stopped, replaced by the oppressive silence of the forest. Julie leaned against her car, gasping for breath. She clutched the camera like a lifeline, her mind racing. She had come to Ravens Hollow for a story, but now she realized she might not be the one telling it. Julie spent the night in a nearby motel, the weight of her encounter pressing on her like a lead blanket. She reviewed the photos she had taken, but the camera only captured the empty room. No shadow, no red eyes, only the faint outline of the diary on the desk. Determined not to let her fear get the better of her, Julie returned to the house the next morning, armed with more equipment: motion sensors, digital recorders, and a thermal camera. She set up her gear methodically, trying to ignore the creeping sensation that she was being watched. The house was different in daylight, though no less unsettling. The whispers were gone, replaced by the occasional creak of settling wood and the distant rustle of leaves. Julie's exploration led her to the basement, a space she had avoided the day before. The air grew colder as she descended, the smell of damp earth and mildew growing stronger. At the bottom of the stairs, she found a cellar lined with shelves of rotting wood. Jars of unidentifiable substances sat in neat rows, their contents long since decayed. In the center of the room was a stone table, stained with dark splotches that could have been wine or blood. Julie set up her thermal camera, aiming it at the table. She activated the motion sensors, then placed a digital recorder nearby. As she turned to leave, she noticed something on the wall, a series of scratches, faint but deliberate. They formed a pattern, a crude depiction of a human figure with its arms raised. A shiver ran down her spine, but she shook it off and returned upstairs. She spent the afternoon documenting the house, taking careful notes and snapping photos of every room. By sunset, she had enough material to start drafting her article. She decided to leave the equipment running overnight, hoping to capture something while she was gone. That night, back at the motel, Julie reviewed the audio from her recorder. At first, there was nothing but static and the occasional creak. But then, just before the recording ended, she heard it, a voice, faint but clear. "Who are you?" Julie froze, her heart pounding. She rewound the recording and played it again. The voice was male, low and guttural. She played it a third time, straining to hear any other sounds, but the recording ended abruptly. She couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with questions. Who had spoken? Was it someone living in the house, or something else? The scratches in the basement, the diary's warning, the shadow, they all pointed to something far darker than she had anticipated. The next morning, she returned to the house, determined to confront whatever was lurking within its walls. But when she arrived, she found the front door ajar, swinging gently in the wind. Her motion sensors were scattered across the floor, and her thermal camera was shattered, its lens cracked beyond repair. In the center of the living room, written in what looked like blood, was a single word: leave. Julie didn't leave. Despite the warning, or perhaps because of it, she felt an inexplicable pull to stay. The house wanted her gone, but it also wanted her there. She retrieved the diary from the study, its leather cover cold and damp to the touch. This time, she didn't open it immediately. Instead, she carried it to the kitchen, where the weak morning light filtered through the grimy windows. She placed the diary on the table and set up her camera to record. With trembling hands, she opened the cover. The first page was blank, as before, but as she turned to the second, new words began to appear. They formed slowly, as if etched by an unseen hand. You seek the truth, but the truth will cost you. Julie swallowed hard. What truth? She whispered, unsure if she even wanted an answer. The diary responded, the words forming faster now. The house was built on a promise. Blood for power. But promises were broken, and the house remembers. The kitchen grew colder, frost creeping across the edges of the windows. Julie wrapped her arms around herself, her breath visible in the chill. Who are you? She asked, her voice barely audible. For a long moment, there was no response. Then, slowly, the words appeared. I am the price. And now, so are you. A sudden crash from the study made Julie jump. She grabbed her flashlight and crept toward the sound, leaving the diary behind. The hallway seemed longer than before, stretching into shadows that weren't there moments ago. When she reached the study, the door was ajar, swinging gently. Inside, the desk was overturned, papers scattered across the floor. The shadow she had seen the day before was there again, taller now, its red eyes burning brighter. It didn't move, but Julie felt its presence pressing down on her like a physical weight. What do you want? She demanded, her voice shaking. The shadow didn't respond, but the whispers returned, a chorus of voices overlapping in a language she couldn't understand. Julie backed away, her flashlight flickering. She turned and ran, the whispers chasing her down the hall. When she reached the kitchen, the diary was gone. The next day, Julie returned to the house with a mix of determination and dread. Whatever had taken the diary had left her feeling incomplete, as though she had lost part of herself. Yet, the pull of the house was undeniable. It felt less like a choice and more like a compulsion. She scoured the house for the diary. The basement, the attic, the dusty library filled with moldering books, all yielded nothing. But the deeper she delved into the house, the more the structure itself seemed to react. Walls groaned, doors slammed without warning, and the whispers followed her, growing louder with each step. Finally, she returned to the basement, her flashlight casting long, trembling shadows against the damp walls. The stone table was no longer empty. The diary sat at its center, its blood-red cover gleaming as though freshly polished. A knife rested beside it, its blade pristine and sharp. Julie hesitated, the air around her thick with menace. She reached out for the diary, but the moment her fingers brushed the cover, a sharp pain shot through her palm. She yanked her hand back to find a small cut, blood welling from the wound. The diary opened on its own, its pages fluttering until they settled on a blank one. As Julie watched, her blood began to drip onto the page, forming words in that jagged, unsettling script. The price must be paid. Julie shook her head, backing away. No, I didn't agree to this. The whispers became a roar, the room trembling as though the house itself were enraged. The words on the page shifted, twisting into a single command. Right. The knife rose from the table, floating toward her. Julie grabbed it instinctively, the cold steel biting into her skin. She didn't want to do this, but the pressure was overwhelming, the whispers filling her mind until there was no room for thought. With trembling hands, she pressed the knife to her palm, letting the blood flow freely. The diary seemed to drink it in, the pages darkening as the ink bled across them. Words formed. Not hers, but something ancient and malevolent. As the last drop of blood hit the page, the whispers stopped. The house fell silent, the air still and heavy. Julie staggered back, her vision swimming. She collapsed to the floor, the diary snapping shut with a finality that echoed through the basement. Julie awoke to darkness. The flashlight had died, leaving her alone in the oppressive blackness of the basement. Her body felt weak, as though the house had drained something vital from her. She climbed the stairs, each step an effort. The house was quiet now, eerily so. The once oppressive whispers were gone, replaced by a silence that felt heavier than any sound. When she reached the kitchen, she found the diary waiting for her on the table, its leather cover pristine. The sight of it filled her with dread, but also a strange sense of relief. The compulsion to leave had faded. The house no longer felt hostile, though the air still carried an undercurrent of unease. Julie packed her things and left Ravens Hollow that day. She didn't look back, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching her, its presence lingering in her mind. When she reviewed her notes and recordings later, she found nothing. The photos were blank, the audio filled with static. It was as though the house had erased itself from her equipment, leaving only the memories etched into her mind. But the diary came with her. No matter where she hid it, it always reappeared, waiting for her to open it again. And every night, as she tried to sleep, she could hear the faintest whisper. The price is never paid in full.